Cargo ships are stuck off the coast of Los Angeles County with 2,000 vehicles on board. Nissan confirmed some actual numbers and engine specifications with us on the new 400Z.
Wow.
BMW even talks about numbers behind their new M440i that's coming out. And will Ram rejoin the midsize truck race? Find out more on this episode. Hey, all you gearheads, welcome back to another up-to-date episode where we bring you the latest in the car industry news, models, all kinds of stuff that's going on in today's world. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it for you. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, as you can imagine, with the way that vehicles are not selling as fast as they are right now, there's a giant cargo ship with over 2,000 Nissan and Infiniti vehicles stuck off the
crazy
Los Angeles. That's a lot of vehicles, yes. And like we were saying, because of the way vehicles aren't selling as fast anymore, dealerships just don't have the room for all these vehicles. Even in LA, where they sell hundreds and thousands of vehicles every month across the city of all kinds of brands, there's just not room at these Nissan and Infiniti dealerships for these vehicles.
Yeah, these dealerships have definitely dropped anchor on the brand of giving them more vehicles. But yeah, to Jacob's point, this is a awful time period, but it also is interesting for you guys to know dealerships do have the power to decline some of the inventory that they will end up receiving. It's not very common, because usually car dealerships will be running out of cars, but this is a weird situation where car dealerships are holding on to too many cars. So
that's generally how the process works, is they'll preemptively order. So, probably a month or ago or so, wherever, because these vehicles came from Japan. So it takes them, I think it's about like 3 weeks to ship it over to the US. So they'll order them 3-4 weeks in advance, probably longer than that, because they got to produce the vehicles and stuff. But then when this whole mess hit with the pandemic, and people aren't buying as many vehicles, and now all these vehicles are coming from across the ocean, they're like, we don't have room for these vehicles anymore, which is, like you said, kind of a sad situation. But that's why the cargo ship, it's still not stuck out there. The article we were reading it was stuck out there for a couple of days. It's the shore since then, it's still not out there floating, so don't be worried about that. But
I mean, it's definitely an example of how the car market has been affected to just another level, but hoping we see that start to turn around, just so we can really get the car dealerships back into order, get the car industry back going, and ultimately help grow the economy back to where it used to be.
Yeah, and one vehicle we're definitely hoping that'll grow some sports car market is the 400Z that we talked about at the very beginning. We spoke about the 400Z in episode last week, so y'all should be a little bit familiar about it already. If you're not, go back and watch that video where we talk about it a little bit. But we've learned that Nissan, through an article we're reading, a source of their secrecy or whatever, somebody who was a guy who works in Nissan probably.
The guy I know.
Yeah, wink, wink, has linked this information to them that it's supposed to be getting a 3.5-liter V6 with twin turbo power, which is
nice.
The same vehicle, or the same engine, that's coming out of the Infiniti Q60. For those of you who don't know, Infiniti is the luxury brand of Nissan, so really it kind of makes sense that they're going to use an engine that's already made within the brand. They don't have to create something new. They can just pull this from the Q60 and drop it into the 400Z.
And it's definitely, I think they're capable of doing that. And it's no offense to Infiniti, but there just hasn't been enough notoriety, and they're not famous enough in the luxury car segment for people to take notice and be like, oh, they're definitely just pulling a 3-liter twin turbo 6-cylinder engine from their Infiniti line and dropping it in the Nissan. But even if people were aware of that, in my opinion, it's still really cool to see Nissan trying to revamp the Z line. I mean, they went from how Jacob was referring in our last video when we talked about this, about how they're putting a trademark request out for that Z logo. And now you see the fruition of it. There's actually a car in the works. Most images right now are just assumptive of what they think it should look like, or people hoping it looks like this, and it's all up in the air. I think between me and Jacob, I assume it will have a lot of design aspects that were carried from the 370Z, as well as mirroring what we were also already referring to as the Q60. And I know me and Jacob talked about it outside of the podcast, but the Q60 is one of our favorite cars. I just wish they would remove the double infotainment screen where you have Apple CarPlay and then how your car and seat controls are. But that's neither here nor there. That's just I'm off my soapbox.
Well, it says it's supposed to debut as a 2021 model, so later this year. But again, with all these new models we've been talking over the course of the last month, I'm really skeptical that any of them are going to arrive on time. But we'll see what happens. If it does come, like we said, through some secret source that car and driver knows, told them this, but I'm really hoping it is some type of V6, even if a single turbo or a twin turbo. That'd be great, because the last 2 generations of the Z model have not had a turbo version, the 370 or the 350, which to me, kind of a disappointment to the rest of the, the Z name, because the 280s, the 240s, they all had turbo versions. You can get them non-turbo, some of the lower models, but actually throwing turbos into this, I think will do some justice to the Z name and really kind of bring it back to life.
Now, speaking of just more turbocharged engines, there's confirmation now of the redesign of the BMW 4 Series, and similar to how the 3 Series had been redesigned for the 2019 model year, they're now going forward with the 4 Series redesign, as well as specs being updated. I'm super excited because I got the chance to drive and rip around in the M340i at the Houston Auto Show. And just to know that they're going to be taking, or what's assumed is they're going to take the powertrain from the M340i and just slap it into the M440i. I'm not offended. I think at this point, like, as a customer, you're just saying, would I rather have a 2-door version of that's nice and about the same size cargo space, versus a 4-door of the 3 Series? So just pick your poison, enjoy it just the same way, and it absolutely just kills it. I think it hits just below 4 seconds on 0 to 60, or maybe right around 4 seconds. That's just silly.
Yeah, and I mean, really, long story short, that's been the main difference between a 3 and a 4 Series is you want 4 doors or 2 doors. Some other features that differ here and there, but that's really the main difference between them.
Yeah.
It only makes sense that they're going to pull an engine that they already have and put it into a 2-door version of the 4-door. So that just makes sense to me.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, this will be what's assumed to have about 382 horsepower, which is very competitive in that segment when you're comparing it against, I mean, we've never even brought it up in this segment, but definitely the Q60 Red Sport 400, the C43 AMG, as well as the Lexus IS 350. So a lot of competition in that segment, but definitely this is a huge competitor when it comes to its segment, because there's not a lot of just straight up coupes. So even talk about an RC 350 Lexus. And so a lot of those, I think it's in a class of its own when it talks about this amount of power, when it's just below a Porsche 911 and above some of those other cars that are right below it. So I think I'm really excited. If I had the money, I would go and get one when it comes out. But
hey, you could win the lottery before then. So
let me go buy one.
Yeah, right. I'll be right back.
Well, speaking of other of these cars, what we got about that Veloster N? I heard you talk about it.
More turbocharged engine for you guys.
More turbo.
But 2 less cylinders. This is a 4-cylinder vehicle. And for those of you who don't really know the history of the N or even the Veloster, this is the 2nd generation of the Veloster. Hyundai has this line that they've sold in other parts of the world, in Europe, and I think even Japan probably too. But the N line has always been their equivalent of like an M series to talk about, what we were just
like their
about. Yeah, their beefier line. They have I think it's the Veloster N30 is what it's called in Europe, and it's a 4-door hatchback in Europe. The Veloster doesn't have 3 doors in Europe; it's 4, and so and it looks pretty slick, similar to what the 2019-2020 Veloster is now, with the same like baby blue and the red stripe and the same design and everything. But in the US, we have the 3-door version, and it comes in a 250 or a 375 horsepower configuration. So that's like a Hyundai factory equivalent to like a performance package that you can get to the 275. But with the 2021, we are actually getting a few new things, that being an actual automatic transmission. Very many vehicles nowadays are made with only manual transmissions. I can think of very few that were. Like, majority of every single SVT Cobra that was produced in the past by Ford and the special vehicle team.
Civic SIs,
and the
most GTIs are made with Volkswagen GTIs are made with a manual.
Yeah, most of them.
So a lot of that segment, very weird, quirky cars.
Yes, exactly. But there's not very many out there. I've mentioned it before. My 2001 Bullet, all manuals. 2008 and 9 Bullets, all manuals. But there's not very many vehicles where they make all of them in a manual. So
exclusively, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So now Hyundai for the 2021 model is bringing an automatic transmission option to it, and people are even estimating a power increase. There's basically an Elantra N version that's sold over in other parts of the world, and it has a 2.5 4-cylinder turbo engine that cranks out 290 horsepower, which is probably the most an Elantra has ever seen in his life. But the Veloster N has a 2-liter, so same engine but just a little bit smaller, 2-liter turbo. So they're thinking that maybe they're going to beef up the Veloster N for the 2021 because you can't let an Elantra beat you out, So.
Well, and there was a lot of talk even right now about the current Sonata, how they've redesigned it and it having more performance. And so it's just a matter of time when you start to see a lot of these powertrains start to leak over and they're only being an adjustment based on the tuning of them. So based on the Veloster, and like you talked about the 4-door, I don't ever expect the 4-door to get here because the only purpose of the Veloster existing in the American market is to have that quirkiness, because there are people that want to have that car that's a little different, but don't want to spend $50,000 to $60,000 on it. Because
you spend $15,000 on a new one like this guy did, which was a horrible decision because it was a base model and it had 132 horsepower or something awful, and I hope I never have to own a vehicle.
Wait, did you say it has 132 second 0 to 60?
Yeah, no, same thing. Yes.
No, so you guys know, I mean, there's a lot, like this is one of very competitive as well, similar to how we were talking about that M440i. The Veloster N, even in its own right now, sits below $30,000 brand new. So you could actually,
with that performance package I mentioned, that's still less. If you don't get the performance package, it's like $25,000 and then 27 with it.
So if you're able to find one on the used market out there, because they're pretty rare, they're not built in excess. If you find one, I'm sure you can find one pretty low mileage around the low 20s. And even upwards of 50 to 60,000 miles around the high 10s, even like 19 to 20,000. Total deal.
Driven it so much already. I would if I had it, but.
Yeah. But not as exciting. I think we have heard some word, and I think it's the epitome of where we are with Ram and Chrysler as a brand, that the Ram Dakota might be coming to a dealership near you in the next couple of years.
As a 2022 model is what I'm speculating. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Dakota name, I used to own a Dakota. That was my first truck in high school, my first vehicle, period. This would be the 4th generation if they continue through with this. I had a 2nd generation one, but they've always been smaller vehicles, much like the older Tacomas, and they even made them in 4-door configurations. Mine was an extended cab, so it just had 2 doors. But it's always been a smaller truck for those people who don't want to buy a full Ram 1500, but they still want a truck to, you know, have a bed and do truck stuff with it, whatnot. The Dakota was always a good option for them. Same reason why you have a Tacoma compared to the Tundra. Same thing with the Frontier to the Titan. And now why I think that they're trying to bring the Dakota back is because Ford has brought out the Ranger. GM had the Colorado and the Canyon for some time now, but now that Ford has re-entered the mid-size truck segment, it's only a matter of time before Chrysler has to step up to the plate too.
Yeah, and like I've said before, they're late to the party. This is Ford is more acceptable, in my opinion, coming into this market late with the Ranger, because I don't think originally that the Ranger had sold as effectively as a Dakota or even the Tacomas from a long time ago. So them bringing the Ranger back that's okay. It's just there was a lot of people that really liked the Dakota, but the fact that they're bringing it back in a time period where we're talking about electric vehicles really surging in the market the next couple of years, this is definitely a truck that should have been seen in 2018, 2019, 2020 right now.
Yeah.
But, oh well.
Well, even still, you know, the Ranger was, I'd say small truck class, not even mid-size, because it used to be just a two-door. So one of our coworkers has one. You see how tiny that thing is. That's how it's been for most of its life. And the Ranger that you see now, the new ones, they've had in Australia and Europe and other parts of the world. So why we never got it? And you would think, you know, U.S. truck drivers, like, that just makes sense. But
we know where their priorities are now. So
yeah, they get it now. But yeah,
definitely.
So see if Ram brings back the Dakota name. If they do, it would be something very interesting. Sure.
Yeah, and if you guys have any other car news out there in the industry that we haven't talked about, definitely let us know. We love hearing more interesting stuff that's happening in the car market and the car industry. All this stuff is definitely, I mean, no pun intended, is news to us. It's all brand new, up to date. So other than that, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can keep up to date with our content as we're producing it. But other than that, we really appreciate
social media also, so that we know when we post stuff.
But we really appreciate you guys. This is Gulf Coast Gearheads signing off.